near these installations, not just in New York City, but all over the country, are often told that our hands are tied by elected officials. We can't do anything about this. There's nothing we can do. I'm hopping back to cell phones for a second. So this is this little folding phone, the Galaxy Z Fold 3 5G. And my dad actually has a phone like this. I just was with him this weekend, and I was just shocked that he would have such a phone. He's almost 90 years old and he's got this flip phone. And I said, well, why did you pick this phone? And he said, well, I wanted something that would fit into my pocket, into my pants or into my front pocket. And I'm like, oh, even though I've been talking about this for a long time, but nonetheless, and I explained to him that if you go into the phone, it says that the testing, it's called SAR testing for the radiation testing, it's been carried out at a distance. For this phone, if you go into the instructions of the phone, there's an RF exposure disclaimer, which says body-wear SAR testing has been carried out at a separation distance of 1.5 centimeters. And to meet the radio frequency exposure guidelines during body-worn operation, the device should be positioned away from the body. And yet people don't know that. That's about the RF radiation that comes out of these devices. Now, I gotta tell you, if you keep the phone at that distance, that does not mean safety or that your health is protected. What that means is that, well, it doesn't even mean that, which is like a whole other story, that supposedly you are going to meet the regulations of the US government. US government regulations are from 1996, outdated and non-protected, but nonetheless, that is what this statement is about. Most people don't even know that. We are putting the phones in our pockets where you're going to get about 2 millimeter distance, and you're not going to have it far enough away to ensure you're even meeting our outdated, irrelevant government regulations. So anyway, all devices have these statements, and we have a site at Environmental Health Trust under the fine print warnings, which we call them, that goes over the fine print warnings of all of these devices. If you want to find it in your Apple iPhone, you go to Settings, General, About, Legal RF Exposure, and you can find that it'll say 5 millimeters. Now, Apple actually changed what it says in their little statement. It used to be clear that the phone was tested at a distance away from the body, and that in order to maintain compliance with our completely outdated government laws, well, I'm saying that they don't say that in order to maintain compliance, that you need to keep the phone at that distance. They changed that around 2017, and they made it so it's even more hard to understand. And it does have the 5 millimeter wording in there, but it does not really clarify the reality of the situation. Whereas the other phone companies, I think their legal teams just haven't gotten to that yet. So they haven't confused us. And what we're told is, of course, there's lots to love, less to spend. We are never told about the radiation that is being emitted from these devices. We are never told that the way these devices are tested for safety, which is not even a proper test, it's fraudulent. It's fraudulent. Look at what they do. They have this big head, an adult male head, where they fill it with a liquid that's supposed to simulate the brain. How a homogeneous liquid can simulate the brain is more than questionable, because, of course, the brain has areas that are thick and areas that are thin, and the radiation moves differently. There actually can be hot spots. That's been documented in studies on cow brains when cell phone radiation is close to the brain tissue. Nonetheless, before a phone comes to market, a phone is placed up to this big head. He's called SAM, short for specific anthropomorphic mannequin. And what you see with that little, let me see if I can do this. With this is like a temperature stick, and it makes sure that the heat does not get too high inside the head from the phone. That is the pre-market compliance tests just based on heat using this outdated model of even what our bodies are like. This doesn't consider children. It doesn't consider the majority of people that are using devices that are much smaller than this big head. Also, devices are tested when it comes to the body. Oh, and I need to say something which you can't tell here, but the ear, you'll often hear, if you dive into this, as many people do, that the phone is tested against the head. Well, it's actually tested against an ear, and the ear is used as a spacer. It's never like tested against, like, you know how some people, they hold phones like this, okay, right into the temple or like that. I mean, I've seen, every which way. They're not tested that way. The antenna is very close, depending on your phone, to the skull. Totally different than what you're seeing here, because there's actually several millimeters of space between where the antennas are and the head in these positions. When it comes to the body testing that's done, they do a body test too. There's a distance that's used. And many phones have 5 millimeters, some have 10, some have 15. In fact, the US government allows phones to be tested for compliance at up to 25 millimeters, which is wild. Who keeps a phone at 25 millimeters? But for a long time, many phones were at that distance. And this, what you're seeing here, is actually an image from the French government. So many countries are just way ahead of us in terms of transparency and compliance testing. They haven't made it to the endpoint, but they're doing much better than we are in the US. And what you're seeing is how the phone is tested at 5 millimeters. And they also have tests that are at 0 millimeters that the French government did. Nonetheless, most test phones are tested at 5 or more millimeters for compliance tests. I just wanted to show you this. This is the Apple iPhone 11 with the 5 millimeter separation. When the French government did tests at body contact, they found the majority of them exceeded limits. If you want to learn about that, go to PhoneGate and the PhoneGate alert website, where you'll see that dozens, over 40 phones have been found to exceed limits. Those phones have been software updated, or they have been actually taken off the market in France because of what France is doing. However, that hasn't translated out here in the United States, nor in all the other countries other than France. And in fact, the French government should be, in our opinion, of course, looking at all the phones at body contact, but the phones that exceeded limits at body contact, they're not able to take action on, because right now the law doesn't say that you must test phones at body contact. That's what's so outrageous about all of this. And yet here we have kids. I mean, this image is pretty typical, right? You're in a grocery store. The babies have phones. The toddlers are watching videos, and yet there is 0 pre-market safety tests for long-term health effects. All it is are these ridiculous the head test and this body test with the distance, but there's no tests looking at long-term health effects that the US government is doing as a part of its pre-market safety protocol. We know from studies that children absorb this radiation proportionately more into their brains by 2 to 3 times, and 10 times higher into their skull. There have been many studies that have been done. This is a animation from scientific modeling done by Claudio Fernandez and engineers from Brazil in collaboration with Environmental Health Trust, just showing how when a phone is near the head, the absorption into the child brain and into the adult brain. And the colors represent the rate. So this is a heating metrics, but yet it is the metrics that is currently being used. It's called the SAR, but it goes from the highest, which is white, to yellow, to orange, to red, to purple, to blue. And you can see that the child head, the head is smaller. There's also different tissues have more water in children, so they have the radiation moves faster into that tissue. Thinner skulls, of course, smaller heads. So of course, you're going to get proportionally more exposure into a child. And of course, they're going to have a lifetime of exposure. Now, virtual reality is being promoted all over. I mean, you can't go on Facebook without these meta ads, and what it is smartphones being put right up to the eyes. Of course, you're getting exposures into the brain, but also into the eyes. And modeling that's been done, published on the absorption into the eye from virtual reality positioned smartphones, where they're put right up in that cardboard container or in an apparatus, has found 2 to 5 times higher cell phone radiation absorption proportionately into children's eyes. And that's a whole other issue. And it ain't just children, right? We're talking about adults too. Our eyes are being exposed. What you need to know about the eyes, however, is that children's eyes, just like their brain, just like their immune system, they are still developing. So there can be more of an impact because more of that, they're more exposed. They don't have the protections on their eyes that adults actually have as the eye ages. And children are exposed from babies from before they're even born, right? When you're pregnant and women are using their abdomen as a shelf. Now, the American Academy of Pediatrics has put out several letters and recommendations on this issue. They are calling for an update to cell phone radiation limits. They say children are not little adults, and they are disproportionately impacted by all environmental exposures, including cell phone radiation. They have 10 tips for families to reduce exposure, which came out after the U.S. National Toxicology Program found clear evidence of a certain kind of tumors in male rats that were exposed. And this study, by the way, the NIH National Toxicology Program study, was done because there was not enough data, well-done data on long-term exposure. And the FDA asked NIH, the National Toxicology Program study of NIH, to do research on animals in order to find out, could there be a problem? They exposed animals for 2 years. They found effects, not just tumors of the heart and in the brain, but also DNA damage, low birth weight, and yet the FDA then turned around and said, well, we don't agree with these findings, even though they asked for the study. Anyway, it's a whole story. Please learn more at Environmental Health Trust or watch some of my earlier talks. I talk about that. And so how do we reduce exposure to phones? I'm starting out with phones. I'm going to hop into towers, and then I'm going to go to wildlife as well. Don't put your phone in your pocket. You are exposing your abdomen, your reproductive parts, your intestines to cell phone radiation. Keep the cell phone out of your pants. Keep the cell phone out of your bra, and don't press it up against your chest. Make the phone a no phone, make the bra a no cell phone zone. Use speakerphone instead of putting the phone up to your head. Text instead of a voice or video call. But hold the phone away from your body, not up to your chest. You see, in this position, the phone is pretty close to the chest, and there are studies that have been done. There's case reports on the young girls who put the phone into their bra and have cancers underneath where they hold the phone. But also, there are studies that have looked at how people use their phones and found increased breast cancer in women who use the phone right around their abdomen area, because you're getting that exposure to the chest. And yet this is typical. This is what is the norm. People don't know about the fine print warnings. They don't know that their cell phone emits radiation. They don't know that here you have an exposure going into a child's body that could have repercussions over time. They need to know. Now, the Connecticut Department of Health has some recommendations on cell phones. At this point, this was from a few years ago, and they need to update all of their materials, but nonetheless, they say make shorter phone calls. Less time with the phone next to your ear means less exposure. And scientists also agree that it is wise to reduce exposure to RF energy from cell phones whenever possible. Some people say to me, Theodora, people don't use the phone up to their head anymore. They're only texting. But we're in a both and situation. Yes, people are texting right up to their chests. But yes, people are also holding that phone up to their ear, especially lawyers, real estate agents, folks who are workers, who are construction site workers. They are talking to clients. They are on that phone. The phone is at the ear, or they're using a wireless earpiece. So, in fact, we have no unexposed group really anymore. I don't know where you'd find them at this point. Another thing that can be done to reduce, but not eliminate exposure, is to disable antennas when you're not using them. The Athens Medical Association is one of many medical associations with recommendations on how to reduce exposure. You can turn off the Wi-Fi, the Bluetooth, the data, the 5G, the cellular. If you're not using it, turn it off so it's not always transmitting. That's one little step that you can do. It doesn't eliminate exposure, and we don't have to go back to this old style phone, although I love them. However, we do need to use corded phones whenever possible. And I have, for example, in my office, a corded phone, which I use all the time. I am on the phone for hours every day, and I use a corded phone. Now, you can't get a copper landline in many communities anymore. No worries. There you can get an internet phone. There are voice over IP. We have it connected with our internet. When we buy the internet, we also have a phone line. Some people use voice over IP, and you just plug in your phone, and all the jacks in my home work. So think about that. Please go to our website at healthytechhome.org to get all kinds of tips and tricks on how to use phones in safer ways, how to install your phone, how to, instead of using laptops and tablets wirelessly, you can connect. Actually, I want to get my cord to show you, but you can connect with an Ethernet. It's much safer. You don't have to have everything wireless. Here's, of course, a typical, this is what kids are doing, right? Their face is smack in front of the screen. Not good for their eyes because of the blue light, and also they're getting the Wi-Fi radiation exposure. It's unnecessary. We can connect with Ethernet. That eliminates the radio frequencies.